Even among other serial killers, Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento, was profoundly disturbed. From a very young age, he lived his life under a series of powerful delusions that had fatal consequences. Just a trigger warning, this episode is pretty graphic as it mentions assault and the R and M words, which I cannot say at the start of the video, so beware. Richard Chase ultimately became infamous when he killed and mutilated the bodies of 6 victims in Sacramento, California in the late 1970s. Given his nickname, it doesn't come much as a surprise that Richard Chase's trademark was drinking the blood of his victims after he killed them. But believe it or not, drinking his victims' blood wasn't even the vampire killer's most disturbing trait. Richard Chase showed signs of mental illness at a young age, but his father, a strict and sometimes physically abusing parent, did little to get him help. Chase was disturbed and unhappy as a child, and his symptoms grew worse in adolescence. He set several small fires, frequently wet the bed, and displayed signs of cruelty towards animals. These 3 habits are sometimes called the McDonald Triad, or the Triad of Sociopathy, proposed by psychiatrist J.M. McDonald in 1963 as a predictor of sociopathy in a patient. Chase's problems grew worse when his father allegedly kicked him out of the house. Without supervision, Chase turned to alcohol and drugs, which quickly turned into substance abuse. Psychotropic drugs accelerated the symptoms of his illness. Like the vampire whose name he would soon adopt, he became convinced on several occasions that his heart had stopped. At times, he thought he was a walking corpse. But being occasionally dead was no reason to neglect his health. Fearing that he lacked vitamin C, he reportedly pressed whole oranges to the skin of his forehead, believing that his brain would absorb the nutrients directly. One of his strangest and most powerful delusions involved his skull. He felt that his cranial bones had split apart and begun to shift beneath his skin, changing places and jumbling like puzzle pieces. He shaved his head in an effort to monitor their movements. Unsurprisingly, at the age of 25, Chase was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and was sent to hospital in 1975 to prevent him from becoming a danger to himself. His fascination with blood earned him the nickname Dracula. Among the psychiatric hospital's assistants who witnessed him kill an attempt to drink the blood of several birds in an effort to wear off the effects of a poison he thought was slowly turning his blood to powder. It was his attempt to inject himself with rabbit's blood which made him violently ill, that had resulted in his institutionalization. It was his attempt to inject himself with rabbit's blood which made him violently ill, that had resulted in his institutionalization. In spite of several similar incidents, the staff believed that he had rehabilitated, and he was released to live with his mother. That was a fatal decision, as Chase's condition wasn't improving. He was growing worse. Though Richard Chase had been released into his mother's care, there was nothing legally binding that forced him to stay with her. Not long after his release from the psychiatric hospital, he moved out, later saying he thought his mother was poisoning him. He moved into an apartment he shared with a group of young men he called friends. But it seemed they didn't know Chase well, and when he persisted in unusual behavior, notably drug abuse that left him constantly high and walking around in the apartment without any clothing, they asked him to leave. Richard Chase, however, refused, and it seemed the path of least resistance to his roommates was to abandon the apartment and find other rental places. Chase was once again living on his own, a circumstance that almost always accelerated the symptoms of his condition. His fascination with blood resurfaced, and he began capturing and killing small animals. He would eat them raw or blend their organs with soda and drink the mixture. In August of 1977, Nevada police found him late one night in the Lake Tahoe area, covered in blood and carrying a bucket with a liver in the back of his pickup truck. Since they determined the blood and organ belonged to a cow, not a human, they let Chase go. Yet again, Richard Chase slipped through the cracks in system that could have helped him and protected others. As it was, alone with no one to watch him or rein him in, he fell more deeply under the power of his delusion, until finally they promoted him to do the unthinkable. On December 29, 1977, Richard Chase was frustrated and lonely. His mother hadn't allowed him to come home for Christmas. He would later recall, and he was mad. Ambrose Griffin, a 51-year-old man who was helping his wife bring in groceries, became his first victim. While driving by their street, Chase pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and shot him in the chest. It was the beginning of an obsession. On January 23, 1978, Chase entered the home of Teresa Wallen, who was pregnant, through her unlocked front door. He felt, he would say during the interrogation, that an unlocked door was a kind of invitation to him, a justification for what happened next. From that time on, all his victims were people who had left their doors unlocked. Richard Chase shot Teresa Wallen 3 times using the same gun he used to shoot Griffin. Chase proceeded to stab her with a butcher knife before cutting out her organs and drinking her blood. He reportedly used a yogurt container as a cup. Chase's final murders were the most gruesome of all. If you have a weak stomach, please stop here and skip to this part of the video. It will get pretty graphic. On January 27, 1978, just 4 days after Wallen's murder, Chase found Evelyn Meredith's door unlocked. Inside were her 6-year-old Jason Meredith, her 22-month-old nephew David Ferreira, and a friend named Dan Meredith. Dan was murdered in the hallway, dead by a gunshot wound to the head. Chase subsequently stole his car keys. Evelyn and Jason were found in Evelyn's bedroom. The little boy had been shot twice in the head. Evelyn was partially cannibalized, her stomach was cut open, and she had multiple organs missing. There were also a failed attempt to remove one of her eyes, and her corpse had been sodomized. The baby, David Ferreira, whom Evelyn had been babysitting, was missing from the scene of the crime. The child's decapitated corpse was found months later behind a church. The story of what happened that night emerged during Chase's trial. The knock of a visitor had startled Sacramento's vampire killer, who took Ferreira's body and fled via Meredith's stolen car. The visitor alerted a neighbor, who then called the cops. The authorities were able to identify Chase's prints in Meredith's blood. When the police searched Chase's apartment, they found that all of his utensils were stained with blood and his fridge contained human brains. Unsurprisingly, Chase was arrested. The sensational trial of the Vampire of Sacramento began on January 2, 1979 and lasted just 5 months. The defense attorney rejected the suggested death penalty on the grounds that Chase was not guilty by reason of insanity. In the end, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury took the side of the prosecution. Richard Chase, the vampire killer, was found guilty of 6 counts of murder and sentenced to death by gas chamber. His fellow inmates, aware of his crimes, were frightened by him. They often encouraged him to kill himself. Richard Chase did just that, stockpiling the anti-anxiety medicine he was offered by the jail staff until he had enough for a fatal overdose. He was found dead in his jail cell the day after Christmas in 1980. Okay, this is by far the most disturbing and most gruesome serial killer I've ever read about. The detail of his last killing made my stomach sick, and I'm truly sorry for all the victims and their families. I know my condolences probably mean nothing to them, but just hearing about what everyone's been through, especially the children, it really made me feel a certain type of way. But with that, we end today's video. If you'd like to see more content like this, please leave a like to this video, sub to the channel would mean the world, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.